And Kristine is a land use and transportation policy and planning specialist with extensive research, experience in research, training, and consulting on access management. Kristine served as the chair of the TRB Access Management Committee from April 2007 until April 2013. I know Kristine for several years now, and I think I'm obviously impressed with her heart and her passion for all things, not just access management. And I think apart from access management and land use, you should maybe, when you get some time later on, ask her about her experiences in Thailand. And she'll tell you about that, and that'll give you some insight into her interests and her passion for it. So Kristine, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate it. Can you all hear me? Yeah, good. Okay, so thanks a lot. I appreciate the opportunity. And I want to mention, too, the Access Management Manual, TRB Access Management Manual, has a synthesis of all the economic impact studies that have been done across the different states on the economic impacts of access management and median projects. And there really has been a lot of work in that area, including the great work that Chris just shared with you. So I encourage you to take a look at that. While I was preparing for this presentation, I Googled, I wanted to get some images, right, for my PowerPoint. So I Googled stop the median, Google images, and you'd be surprised what came up. Some of these are rather old. This Stop the Median Victory Fund is brand new. There's really, this is an issue that just doesn't seem to go away, and certainly something that you're probably going to face. So when you have a controversial issue like this, generally I think people are going to get involved whether or not you give them an opportunity. So the challenge really is to involve them in a way that's meaningful both for them and for your agency. And I have my biases. Let's help educate the public as well so they can make better decisions in the future. That's part of our goal as good civil servants. And so one of the things you can do is certainly be prepared, have some sort of a process in place. If you're a large agency like a DOT, you're going to want to perhaps adopt some guidance for your staff in terms of, and this is from FDOT, one of our districts. We have several. It's decentralized in Florida. By the way, I'm with the University of South Florida. I think you might have mentioned that. I don't remember if you did, but I'm not with Florida DOT, just so you know. But I did some research for them on this topic and developed this public involvement handbook for median projects back in the 90s. I think it's still relevant today. You just Google it and it'll pop up. So the process that the district used is discussed in there. But certainly, if it's very controversial, they get their press office involved. Then they, if there are a lot of people affected, they're going to brief the elected officials because they're the first ones that are going to hear about it, right? So let them know that there's a process in place to deal with public concerns. That's going to go a long way down the road to helping avoid them getting actively involved. And then the public meetings need to be held, obviously, beyond the public hearing, looking at the comments and so forth, and if there's changes needed to notify property owners. So they have a tiered process in place for looking at that, and also a really good process for handling variation from their standards and flexibility. So one of the things that, well, I get ahead of myself. I'll talk about that in a moment. So we need to be also thinking about the general principles of public involvement. And this is true whether it's a median or anything else. Some of our typical issues that we learned in kindergarten, it's kind of tough to communicate clearly. I don't know if any of you have tried to explain what you do to your family members, but nobody understands what I do. And I finally gave up and said, well, safety, I guess. Listen carefully, be a good listener, That was one of my first big mistakes, was to try to argue with somebody. That never do that. Be a listener. Satisfy process values, be inclusive, tell the truth. So process values, let's look at that. So ultimately, I think the success or failure of your project relies on whether people are going to try to actively exercise their veto power against you. And so it helps to understand what creates an opponent or an active opponent. And so that's some of the material I was looking at. And certainly we know that people are going to be more likely to oppose what you do if they think the decision process is unfair, and if they feel the outcome is going to be much worse than doing nothing. And when you come to businesses and medians, yeah, they fall in that category too. They feel that you are threatening their very existence. So this is, I mean, we might not be able to achieve consensus, you know, but a grudging willingness to go along, that's kind of where we're at with a lot of this. So to gain public acceptance, what can we do to reduce the likelihood that people are going to exercise that veto power? Well, another thing is that we definitely never try to slip a controversial decision, project, policy through the process without letting people know. Because if you do, then your project, or maybe your entire access management program, is living on borrowed time. And we've certainly seen in Florida where a mistake might have been made, somebody tried to expedite the process, and next thing you know, there's a change in the access management statute because a lobbyist got actively involved at that state level. So you got to be careful about that issue, and certainly people are much more likely to go along if they feel they've been fully informed, treated fairly. So what does that mean? What are some of the indications of that? Well, process issues, we know people are going to get upset if they think you didn't follow your procedures. So you have a process, but somehow, you know, they weren't notified, or you've moved it along more quickly than is typical. They weren't involved early enough. They weren't notified, or they didn't have time to respond to what he says. So let's look at some of those things a little bit more. So what does it take? About maybe 10 years from concept to construction? You know, it takes a long time, and people change. They're going. It's tough to kind of maintain that continuity, but it's very important, and I'll show you a few examples. But begin very early, parallel the decision process, and help the public know that their concerns are going to be considered, and then follow back up with them. And certainly this DOT, having a DOT secretary apologize for ramrodding a project through in the city of Tallahassee was a sad day in Tallahassee. And it was a lesson learned, right? And so even your heart's in the good, right place. You want to reduce controversy, but sometimes you just have to grin and bear it, and that's certainly true as medians. So that the public changes, more people get involved as the project progresses, right? And so how do we establish linkages with those past decisions? And one of the things that I heard from Kittleson, for example, and the consulting firms are doing this, and they're very good, storyboarding, kind of each time you go out to the public meeting, what did we decide last time? What were some of the commitments made? And what are we here to decide today? Who was involved? Kind of keeping that conversation and documenting that as you move forward into the public involvement process. So you're establishing those linkages with past decisions. And if you made commitments in the past, follow through on those commitments. And unless there's a very, very good reason and demonstrable reason why you can't. Now, Florida adopted a median policy in the mid-90s requiring raised non-traversable medians on all multi-lane arterials 45 miles an hour or more, and even some segments that aren't, where there's safety issues. So medians are a tool that's actively being used throughout Florida, and really, we still have a lot of business on those corridors. I'm not, you know, you see a lot of businesses, and so certainly they're not, but anyway, they're not putting everybody out of business. But one of the things we found as we were studying this issue for FDOT early on is that one of the issues that was causing them more controversy was that those commitments weren't following through from the early project development into the early design phase, later design phases, and then on into construction. So they were falling through the cracks, particularly what we suggested was to involve the public again early in that design phase. So even if you think you resolved everything in project development process, early in that design phase, the designers should get involved again in terms of communicating what's happening out on the corridor. Reliance on public hearings in those days, and I think most folks are not doing that these days, I hope, but there are other more effective ways of getting people's comments in a public meeting, and one of them is that open house format, which I'll show you in a moment. And then there were inconsistencies in decisions across the districts, and certainly businesses, they may have activity in more than one district, and they kind of get it, and they know when things aren't the same. And so we developed a median opening procedure. What are the criteria that go into whether a median opening should remain or be closed? And that procedure is available online. I'm certainly happy to point you to that. And it includes guidelines for public involvement, those guidelines I mentioned about getting people involved again early in design. So enacting that procedure helped all the different districts sort of come on board in terms of how they were going to proceed in that process. Nonetheless, the legislature still decided to add a new provision on public involvement early in design to the law, but just to solidify that, I guess they were already doing it. Here's an example of that open house format. It's nice because in a public hearing format, people get nervous. Like me, I'm standing up here talking to you, and I'm thinking, oh, and there's this, all these people, and they're all angry, and suddenly I'm more emotional, and then everything kind of gets grandstanding. This is much, you have the one-on-one, the person can see where's my property, you can point it out, talk to them in that kind of way. It's a much nicer situation, and have areas for comment. You might have a video. They're still doing meeting presentations, but it's not quite the same level that you would have with a public hearing where people really do get whipped up. And so once you got folks there, and this material I've shamelessly stolen from David Gwynn, who's now Secretary of Florida DOT District 7 in the Tampa Bay area, but back when he was in consulting, he did this series of communication strategies for one of our access management conferences, actually. But so the number one issue that you face, obviously, with the business community, and it's a very passionate complaint, is you're going to put me out of business. And it may be difficult to kind of move somebody away from that position. And what we need to do is kind of, and Chris mentioned this earlier in his workshop, kind of start to frame the issues. One of those issues is that people are still going to patronize businesses where they get good value, good price, and also I'm going to say if it's a high volume corridor, they're not making left turns during peak periods anyway. they're kind of shopping on the side into work and on the other side back out. But the business owner, has control over so many of these issues in terms of making their business more successful that have nothing to do at all with the median or any other issue surrounding them. People, the traveling public is certainly going to avoid left turns where they're risky, where a business is hard to get in and out of, and the median can provide a much safer environment for that to take place. The continuous two-way left turn lanes are dramatically unsafe on many of these corridors. And research on economic impacts has not found that people are put out of business as a result of median projects as consistently, and there's even studies in Texas, or sorry, in Kansas, where they've gone in and looked at where they paid damages to a business owner as a result of a project, and they went back after the fact and saw that they were doing as well, if not better, than they were before, but they still had to pay those damages. That study is documented in the Access Management Manual. But it's an idea for you guys if you haven't already done these sorts of studies, because of course, you know, that's Kansas or Florida or Texas. So if you're in Wisconsin, you might want to do some studies like that in Wisconsin if you haven't already. But that research does not show that people are put out of business. Certainly construction impacts, that's a different issue in my view, because it's a temporary impact. And so maintenance, good maintenance of access during construction would be important to them. And also most of the customers surveyed say that they really like it, that they feel safer on those routes. So there's a lot of information you can draw on in terms of these studies that will help you in communicating on that issue. Another one is, no one can show me how you came to your decision. Well, if you say it's because that's what our standards say, I'd say that's an instant credibility killer, right? Because that's not enough for most people, and they immediately view you as inflexible. So, so what can you do to show them how you came to your decision? Well, first of all, know the reason, the rationale for the project and why you redesigned it and what the safety issues are there and what some of the reasons that you needed to design it in that particular way. Show them that detailed documentation. Talk about the benefits of access management. Have handouts, have materials on that issue. And again, do your best to work through those issues using actual local data in terms of that project. I wasn't notified of the meeting. Use the media. Now, one of the things about the media is the media can be your friend also in terms of getting good news out there on access management in general. And I remember an article in our area paper where Busch Gardens, it was called A Happy Median, with a landscaped median, and Busch Gardens had landscaped and really beautified the route coming in, which was kind of an old commercial corridor, kind of tacky as you're going into. So for tourism and economic vitality of the area, the median was a real benefit. So having that kind of coverage, meeting with the editorial boards is a great thing, but also they get the word out. Know that the owners and the tenants may not be the same, so if you're notifying the owners, you might have to go out and actually hand deliver flyers to the tenants and those newsletters and so forth, the chambers, homeowners groups. Look at the aerials, talk to the local agencies and find out, is there anybody we're missing, that we might be missing that's actually affected by this project, so that we don't miss them in terms of the notification. And then keep a list of all of the people that you've notified so that you can then say, well, yeah, we did, but you know, if you didn't get it, or maybe you're not on this list, you know, we apologize. You know, we'll definitely get that information to you right away. And of course, radio, TV. We've got so much now in terms of ways to get the word out. This is where the listening comes in. And maybe if, you know, you don't care what I have to say, kind of let them know that you do care, and you haven't made the final project yet. You're still open to changes as a result of their input, and sometimes restating or getting them, if they're very long-winded, to restate and come to some conclusion in terms of what their concerns are. And then certainly kind of going back to folks and saying, here's the changes that we made. Writing personalized letters that tell them what those changes are and thank them for their comments and their involvement helps them know that you're flexible and that you're willing to listen to their concerns. Trucks, this is where the engineering comes in, and you go in and you look at that site, you talk to the business owners, you drive how it's going to circulate, how are the trucks coming in and out, are there issues that you need to resolve? You might need to change the project a little bit, and some of the issues might cost a lot of money, others are relatively easy to do. But certainly getting those deliveries in and out, and in this modern day and age with all the e-commerce, it's getting to be more and more of an issue, I think, to make sure that those trucks can navigate the site. UTurn Safety, you've probably heard this one. The Median Handbook has studies on U-turn safety that show that a direct left out of the property versus a right U is 18% crash rate reduction, 27% injury fatality reduction, and it's actually quicker on a high volume route. And I do it all the time in Florida. I mean, it's a safer maneuver. You do want to make sure, you know, that the design is correct to handle those U-turns. You might even talk to local law enforcement and ask them, are there problems here? And in terms of U-turns, and also that right turn conflict at the U-turn location is another issue to look at. So if there's right turning traffic where there's U-turns. And I'm moving along quickly here, but, so generally, kind of in conclusion, most people aren't seeing a loss of business due to access management projects and medians. You'll see that information. Here's Florida studies. Most business owners really felt no impact at all, and some actually felt a positive impact. One of the things is we want to improve accessibility to those sites and talk to them about cross-access and network connections and all of those things. Can you get people out to a signal so they can make a safe left turn? They'll be more likely to come in and out of your site. Because most of the customers in here doing a customer, you know, at the public meetings, the opponents are going to show up, right? How do you tap that traveling public that's in support of the project through a survey and reporting back on those survey results after the fact, doing a few of those before and after, and people are generally feeling safer and more comfortable getting to that site. A couple of resources, FDOT Access Management, you know, answers to your questions is a good one, and Safe Access is good for business. There's a video, it's a little old and dated. There's a lot of resources now that are out there on the web from the different states, these videos, and I think even on our accessmanagement.info site. So hopefully that gave you some good ideas from the world out there in the consulting world and other agency staff, and I'm happy to answer any questions before I turn it over back to John. They're so quiet. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.